Hello and welcome, I'm James Azimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Our top story this hour, Putin proposes Alaska venue for possible peace negotiations with Ukraine. US and Iran signal progress ahead of new talks. And Azerbaijan expands its international role through diplomacy and connectivity. Our top story today is Europe's four-year conflict and a possible new venue for talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed a US military facility in Alaska for negotiations with Ukraine after Volodymyr Zelensky called for a face-to-face meeting.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that Russia is fully prepared to negotiate with Ukraine at a US military facility in Alaska. Speaking at the 29th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said Russia remains ready to pursue a negotiated settlement based on a framework discussed with US President Donald Trump in August last year.
We are absolutely ready and willing to reach an agreement with Ukraine through peaceful means, and on the basis we discussed at our meeting with President Trump in Anchorage. At that meeting, Russia was asked to consider certain compromises, and Russia is willing to accept the compromises we discussed in Anchorage. But the Ukrainian side must also agree to these compromises, and then the conflict will quickly come to its natural conclusion.
His comments come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky published an open letter to Putin proposing a meeting between the two leaders to agree on an end to more than 4 years of war. Zelensky proposed setting a clear date for the meeting and said several countries had traditionally hosted leaders seeking to resolve wartime disputes, citing Switzerland, Turkey, and countries in the Arab world. Trump also backed the idea of a meeting between the two leaders, saying both sides would need to make compromises.
Well, I don't know. I'm glad that they're maybe talking about meeting. I think we had a lot to do with it. I know exactly what you're doing. But I think it would be great if they met. They should get it done. They're going to both make compromises. I suggested those compromises. And, you know, we've had a lot to do with it. We'd love to see they're two very good people. They're two very, incredible countries, beautiful countries.
Meanwhile, Russia says its forces have taken control of a settlement in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces struck 142 areas over the past day, targeting Ukrainian long-range drone storage and launch sites, as well as energy and transport infrastructure used by Ukrainian forces. Ukraine also reported an attack on a Russian patrol ship. The vessel, measuring nearly 50 meters in length, was struck near the settlement of Yurkin in Russian-occupied Crimea.
Now, Ukrainians are weighing President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for direct talks with Vladimir Putin. Some see little chance of progress, while others say dialogue is the only path to peace.
President Volodymyr Zelensky published an open letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday. In Kyiv, Ukrainians gave mixed reactions. Some dismissed the letter as unlikely to change Moscow's position, while others said any step toward dialogue was worth trying after years of war.
This letter is pointless. How can we stop the war when Russia has such unreasonable demands? The Russian Federation has made it clear that they want all of Ukraine. Zelensky could write 100 letters. It wouldn't make a difference. Until this invasion stops at the front lines, there will be no negotiations.
Vladimir Putin has ignored more than one such letter, more than one such appeal. I personally don't expect any feedback from him. But from a diplomatic standpoint, this is a fairly strong letter, which I think is addressed more to the Western world than to Vladimir Putin.
A step in the right direction. Just a word, even if it is in a letter, can lead to positive results, perhaps even to peace. If we don't talk, nothing will happen.
In the letter, Zelensky said it would be wrong to simply wait for the war to return to the center of US attention. He said peace could only come through direct engagement between Ukraine and Russia, and called for a full ceasefire during negotiations, something Putin had ruled out earlier on Thursday. In Moscow, the Kremlin said it had seen the letter and that Putin would be briefed on it.
Now, funerals were held in Gaza City after Israeli airstrikes killed at least 11 Palestinians, including women and children. Health officials say several residential buildings were hit before dawn in different parts of the city, leaving dozens more wounded. Witnesses reported powerful explosions and scenes of panic as people tried to escape burning buildings. The Israeli military said the strikes targeted 4 senior Hamas security officials. Simultaneous strikes were launched by at least 3 Israeli helicopters against 4 residential buildings, according to BBC. Efforts to ease tensions between the United States and Iran appear to be entering a new phase, with fresh diplomatic activity raising cautious hopes of progress. But as talks continue, political pressure in Washington is adding another layer of uncertainty.
Efforts to ease tensions between the United States and Iran may be gaining momentum, with a new round of talks expected on Friday, and reports of a possible preliminary agreement between the two sides. Sources say the proposed deal would establish an initial framework for future negotiations, while allowing diplomats to continue working on unresolved issues before a final agreement is reached.
But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
President Donald Trump says negotiations are progressing well and has suggested a deal could come as soon as this weekend. He also said he would not rule out meeting Iran's supreme leader if a peace agreement is reached. Trump reiterated that preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons remains Washington's top priority. He also repeated claims that earlier US strikes destroyed Iranian nuclear facilities. The president revealed that the United States had considered sending troops to Iranian nuclear sites to remove enriched uranium, but ultimately decided against it because of the risks of casualties and a prolonged military engagement. Meanwhile, reports suggest the preliminary agreement could be called the Islamabad Declaration, reflecting Pakistan's role as a mediator in the negotiations. Sources say Pakistan could announce the agreement ahead of further talks involving senior US and Iranian negotiators. But as diplomatic efforts continue abroad, Trump is facing growing political pressure at home. The Republican-led House of Representatives has approved a resolution directing the president to withdraw US troops from Iran unless Congress authorizes military action. The measure passed by a vote of 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans joining Democrats in support. Although the resolution is largely symbolic for now, the vote highlights increasing concern among some lawmakers over the conflict. Trump has criticized the measure, calling it unpatriotic and arguing it comes at a critical stage in efforts to end the war. The White House, meanwhile, continues to defend its policy, insisting military operations against Iran are necessary to prevent the country from developing a nuclear weapon.
The United States has sanctioned Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, freezing his assets and those of his family as Washington continues to ramp up pressure on the island country. President Trump called Cuba a failed nation and suggested Washington may take further action once it wraps up military operation in Iran. Ira Spitzer has more.
According to a filing on the Treasury Department's website, the U.S. has imposed personal sanctions on Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, along with his wife and others. Cuba's armed forces and its internal surveillance network were also added to the Treasury blacklist, as well as a son of former President Raul Castro, who served as an advisor on defense and national security. The sanctions are the latest move in a broader escalation that has been building for months. Back in May, President Trump signed an executive order significantly expanding the U.S. sanctions framework on Cuba, putting foreign companies and banks that do business with the island at risk. Diaz-Canel has led Cuba since 2018, but is facing an acute economic and energy crisis made worse by the U.S. capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, a key ally. Speaking at the White House Thursday, Trump said the U.S. had some, quote, very good plans for Cuba, and that Washington had to get rid of the government there, and noted that they don't currently have any money or oil coming in. Trump also suggested that he would, quote, take care of the situation after the U.S. operation in Iran finishes. In San Francisco.
Germany has suffered diplomatic setback after failing to win a rotating seat on the UN Security Council. The result is raising questions about Berlin's ability to rally international support and what that could mean for Europe's influence on the world stage.
Germany's failure to win a rotating seat on the UN Security Council has raised questions about Berlin's diplomatic standing and its ability to rally support beyond Europe.
Number of votes obtained, Portugal 134.
Austria and Portugal won the two available seats for the Western Europe and Others group in Wednesday's vote at the UN General Assembly. Portugal received 134 votes and Austria 131. Germany received 104, falling short of the 127 votes needed for election. The result ended a long diplomatic streak. Since 1987, Germany had won a rotating Security Council seat every 8 years, serving most recently in 2019 and 2020. Winning a seat on the United Nations Security Council means a country has successfully secured one of the 10 coveted non-permanent 2-year terms on the UN's most powerful body. Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul called the outcome a bitter defeat and said Germany would review what went wrong. He also told ARD he had considered resigning if Germany lost the vote, but decided against it. For the defeat, Wadephul pointed to foreign policy as one possible factor.
There's our rocket-solid support for Ukraine. It is no secret that Russia does not want such a voice at the table in the Security Council that campaigned against us. It also may have cost us votes that Germany must always assume a special responsibility for Israel with regard to the Middle East conflict. We will continue to live up to our historical responsibility, even if at the time we criticize specific policies of the current government.
Russia has not responded to accusations that it lobbied against Germany's candidacy. Germany's position on Israel has also drawn scrutiny as Germany criticizes some Israeli actions in Gaza, Lebanon and Iran while rejecting sanctions against Israel. Other explanations have focused on Germany's outreach. Opposition politicians and non-governmental organizations said repeated cuts to development cooperation may have weakened support among countries in the global south. Austria and Portugal had expressed interest in the Security Council seats more than a decade earlier and maintained a stronger presence at the UN in New York. Chancellor Friedrich Merz did not attend the UN General Assembly last year, sending Wadephul instead. The defeat has become a political problem for Merz's government, which came to power promising to restore Germany's influence in Europe and beyond. Opposition figures called the result embarrassing, while coalition members described it as a warning sign about how the country is perceived internationally. Germany remains Europe's largest economy and one of the biggest contributors to the UN budget. But the vote suggested that financial weight alone was not enough to secure diplomatic support. The result also carries wider significance for Europe. As one of the EU's main political and economic anchors, Germany plays a central role in shaping the bloc's position on issues including Ukraine, the Middle East, and competition with major powers. For Berlin, the defeat is now a test of whether it can rebuild diplomatic trust. For Europe, it is a reminder that the bloc's global influence depends not only on economic power, but on its ability to build coalitions beyond the continent.
China's leading trade promotion body has hit back at sweeping new U.S. tariff proposals, calling them unilateral, protectionist, and without basis in international law. The measures, which target dozens of economies over forced labor allegations, have drawn pushback from trade partners worldwide. Manu Makdum has more from Beijing.
China's business community has expressed strong dissatisfaction and firm opposition to a proposed U.S. tariff measure targeting dozens of economies, including China, over allegations related to forced labor. The China Council for the Promotion of International Trade said that the measure uses tariffs as a tool of policy pressure and bears the clear hallmarks of unilateralism and protectionism. The proposal issued by the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative would impose additional duties of up to 12.5% on imports from 60 economies. Washington says that those economies have failed to ban goods made with forced labor, creating what it calls an unlevel playing field for American workers. China faces the steeper 12.5% rate alongside India, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and others, while economies with partial prohibitions in place, including the EU, the UK, Canada, and Pakistan, would face a 10% duty. The Chinese side argued the US conclusion that targeted economies policies undermine efforts to eliminate forced labor is not supported by sufficient evidence, and that differentiated tariff arrangements violate the principles of non-discrimination and fair competition. China's business community has called on the United States to stop abusing trade restrictions, return to the rules-based multilateral trading system, and resolve trade disputes through dialogue and consultation rather than unilateral action. Manu Makdum, A-News, Beijing.
EU and Western Balkan leaders are meeting in Montenegro for talks on enlargement, regional stability, and closer economic cooperation. More than 30 leaders are attending the summit in the coastal city of Tevat, including French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Discussions are expected to focus on accelerating integration with the European Union, expanding access to parts of the single market, and advancing the bloc's growth plan for the Western Balkans. All right, after the break, we'll discuss the latest EU-Western Balkans summit in Montenegro, where European leaders are seeking to inject new momentum into the enlargement process. Stay with us. Welcome back to A-News. We sincerely apologize for the loss in transmission with our guest. Now we turn our gaze to a breaking news, a deadly incident in the Sea of Azov. 5 Azerbaijani citizens have been killed and 3 others injured after 2 foreign cargo ships were hit by a drone attack overnight. According to Azerbaijan's foreign ministry, 2 vessels came under attack in Tangarov Bay. Officials say the ships are not owned by the Azerbaijani state. The injured crew members are being treated at a hospital. Azerbaijan says embassy staff have been dispatched to the area and are coordinating support for those affected. Authorities are continuing to monitor the situation and will keep you updated on all the developments. Now, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met Bangladeshi Foreign Minister Khalidor Rahmani in Dhaka during his first visit to Bangladesh since taking office. Fidan is visiting Bangladesh on June 5th and 6th, with talks focused on bilateral ties, economic cooperation, and regional developments, including the Middle East, Iran, and South Asia. Now, the 3+3 Regional Cooperation Platform held its first meeting on Friday on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The format brings together Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan alongside their three neighbors, Russia, Turkey and Iran. But as has been the case since the platform was launched, Georgia was absent. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
The 3+3 format was proposed in 2021, largely driven by Russia and Turkey in the aftermath of the Second Arab War. The idea was to establish a standing regional cooperation platform for the South Caucasus, one that would address issues of connectivity, trade and stability among the 6 nations that share the region without the involvement of Western institutions or partners. The 3+3 regional cooperation platform convened its first session on Friday during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in Russia. Georgia's set, however, was empty, as it has been at every 3+3 meeting to date. Tbilisi's position is formal and consistent. Georgia does not participate in this format. The Foreign Ministry has stated this repeatedly, and today was no different. The reasons are well established. Georgia and Russia have had no diplomatic relations since the 2008 war, when Moscow unilaterally recognized the breakaway Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. For Tbilisi, engaging within any framework where Russia sits as a formal and equal partner is fundamentally incompatible with its foreign policy course. Georgia holds EU candidate status and remains constitutionally committed to Euro-Atlantic integration, making participation in a Russia-anchored regional platform a political and diplomatic contradiction. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to visit Central Asia later this year, as Washington signals a deeper push for economic and diplomatic engagements with the region. Our correspondent Farza Kalmaziner has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Central Asian countries later this year. Speaking at the hearing before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Rubio also confirmed plans for a C5+1 meeting. But the planned visit was not the only major signal. The Trump administration appears to support repealing the Jackson-Vanik Amendment for Central Asian countries, an issue Kazakhstan has been raising with Washington for years. The amendment was introduced in 1974 and restricted trade with countries accused by the United States of violating human rights and limiting freedom of immigration, primarily the Soviet Union. While it largely lost its original purpose after immigration restrictions were lifted in the late 1980s, it was never formally repealed. Several former Soviet states, including Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, Moldova and Russia, later had the restrictions removed. The remarks come at the time of growing engagement between Washington and Central Asia. The second Central Asia-US summit held in Washington late last year, Kazakhstan signed more than 30 agreements with American companies valued at over $17 billion. Uzbekistan, meanwhile, announced trade and economic agreements with the United States totaling up to $175 billion, along with the cooperation on rare earth minerals. And against this backdrop, experts say repealing the Jackson-Vanik Amendment could signal a new phase of closer economic engagement between the United States and Central Asia. Farza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Now, Azerbaijan is hosting this year's World Environment Day in partnership with the United Nations Environment Programme, bringing together government officials, environmental experts and international representatives in Baku. Discussions will examine practical solutions for reducing methane emissions across several sectors, as well as declining water levels in the Caspian Sea and the need for coordinated regional action. Azerbaijan assumed the World Environment Day presidency from South Korea in 2024 and is using the platform to highlight efforts in biodiversity protection, ecosystem restoration and climate action.
Distinguished guests, what a morning of vision, commitment and hope.
Now, our correspondent Leila Rahimli, who is covering World Environment Day in Baku, spoke with several officials about the impact of the event. Here's what they had to say.
Well, first of all, big congratulations to Azerbaijan for hosting World Environment Day 2026. We are enormously grateful for the leadership that Azerbaijan has shown from the beginning of when Azerbaijan put up its hand and said, we will host COP29. And then Azerbaijan has really stepped into leadership under the leadership of His Excellency the President. What I think about this day, just take a look around. It's fabulous. And this is a voice from Azerbaijan to the entire world. Act for nature, act for climate, act now. And make sure that what we do today is good for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. We really congratulate Azerbaijan for this extraordinary leadership.
First of all, World Environmental Day is one of the globally most important days, especially in the area of climate changes and needing concrete actions towards positive results. Here in Baku, it is important that lots of world leaders and other stakeholders, representatives of UN, NGOs, gather together and define what we really need to do, and we must not take any chances in terms of making some arena for not acting soon. So next year in Belgrade, on the 5th of June, together within our specialized expo, Play for Humanity, we want to continue with these urgent platforms where we are really going to make efforts and put things forward in terms of environmental protection.
Now, Azerbaijan is increasingly positioning itself as a bridge between regions, using diplomacy, energy and connectivity to expand its international role. From global summits to transport corridors and peace efforts in the South Caucasus, Baku's foreign policy footprint is growing.
Azerbaijan's international engagement has expanded significantly in recent years through a combination of diplomacy, connectivity, and energy cooperation. The country has played an active role in a number of international organizations and initiatives, including serving on the United Nations Security Council and chairing both the non-aligned movement and the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia. Baku has also hosted major international events, including COP29 and the World Urban Forum, bringing together leaders, policymakers, and experts to address global challenges. The country's international activity has increased in the years following the restoration of its territorial integrity and the launch of efforts aimed at advancing a regional peace agenda in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan's strategic location between Europe and Asia has strengthened its position as a key transport and logistics hub, particularly through the development of the Middle Corridor and other regional connectivity routes linking east and west, as well as north and south. Energy remains another central pillar of Azerbaijan's international engagement. Through projects such as the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, the Southern Gas Corridor, and broader energy infrastructure networks, Azerbaijan has become an important supplier to regional and European markets. Alongside traditional energy exports, the country has expanded investment in renewable energy projects, including large-scale solar and wind developments, as well as initiatives aimed at strengthening green energy connectivity. Azerbaijan has also increasingly positioned itself as a platform for dialogue, hosting high-level meetings and diplomatic contacts involving regional and international actors, while promoting cooperation on security, economic, and political issues. At the same time, initiatives such as the Baku Process and the Global Baku Forum have helped expand international discussions on intercultural dialogue, tolerance, and cooperation. During its chairmanship of the non-aligned movement, Azerbaijan also supported a special session of the United Nations General Assembly on the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic and provided humanitarian assistance to dozens of countries. The initiatives reflect Azerbaijan's increasing participation in international diplomacy, connectivity projects, and global policy discussions.
Now, the United Nations is warning that environmental challenges are becoming an increasingly serious threat to Afghanistan's future. From drought and water shortages to pollution and land degradation, the impact is being felt across communities already facing significant economic pressures. Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
UNAMA says Afghanistan is facing growing environmental pressures that are threatening livelihoods, food security and stability. Drought and water shortages remain the biggest concern, especially in rural areas where agriculture is the main source of income. In the south, rivers are drying up, rainfall is declining and groundwater is being overused. The impact is already severe. Crop production is falling. Safe drinking water is becoming harder to access and some families are being displaced in search of water. UNAMA also warns that contaminated water is increasing the risk of disease. Women and children are among the worst affected. In many communities, women and girls are responsible for collecting water, making the crisis not only environmental but also a gender issue. The UN mission also points to flash floods, dust storms, deforestation, pollution and poor waste management as worsening the situation. UNAMA says solutions exist, including better water management, efficient irrigation and community-led environmental action. But it says urgent and coordinated support is needed to protect lives, livelihoods and Afghanistan's natural resources. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now from Grozny to Aleppo and Agdam, a new study examines how cities can become deliberate targets during and after armed conflicts. Experts argue that the destruction of urban areas often extends beyond military objectives, reshaping communities, identities, and post-war realities. Here's more.
A new study published in the Journal of Urban Affairs examines how cities can become deliberate targets during and after armed conflicts. The authors define modern urbicide through three main features: the intentional destruction of urban areas, the forced displacement of populations, and the loss of historically and culturally significant buildings. The research focuses on three cities: Grozny in Chechnya, Aleppo in Syria, and Agdam in Azerbaijan. While each conflict was different, the study finds a common pattern. These cities held strong symbolic value for the competing sides. Grozny was the center of the Chechen independence movement. Aleppo carried major historical and cultural importance in Syria. Agdam was a significant city for Azerbaijan in the Karabakh region. The study argues that destroying such places can send a political message, demonstrating victory for one side and defeat for the other.
For those 26 years of occupation between 1994 and 2020, those territories were completely destroyed. And Azerbaijan, after the liberation of those territories in 2020, the Azerbaijan side found that those territories, the whole infrastructure, completely destroyed, erased, not only the buildings, but pipelines, sewage system, everything. Azerbaijan is dealing with the restoration of territories equal to the size of Lebanon.
Researchers also point to a newer trend. In some conflicts, cities are not only damaged during fighting, but are later kept uninhabitable to prevent displaced residents from returning.
So this is I think, the peculiar character of urbicide in Karabakh, in Agdam, because it was done after a hot phase of armed conflict, after basically armed clashes ceased. Year by year, we started destroying the cities. So that's the one peculiar feature. So this happened after armed clashes, and it was done to prevent the return of internal displaced people, refugees to those territories. That's the core of our study.
The authors note similarities with cases in the Balkans, Syria, Chechnya, and more recently Ukraine. They argue that attacks on cultural landmarks and urban infrastructure often target a community's identity as much as its physical space. The researchers conclude that urbicide is not only about the destruction of buildings, it can also be a method of political control, used to transform cities, populations, and systems of governance long after the guns fall silent.
Now, the murder of student Henry Novak continues to dominate headlines in Britain following the sentencing of his killer to life in prison, but the case has now moved beyond the courtroom, fueling protests, political pressure, and a wider debate over policing, public trust and online responsibility. A news reporter Zainab Farizada has more.
The murder of student Henry Novak continues to dominate headlines in Britain, following the sentencing of his killer, Vikram Digwa, who was jailed on Monday for life with a minimum term of 21 years. The case has triggered widespread public anger and protests in Southampton, some of which turned violent. Police say officers were injured and arrests were made as tensions escalated outside the police station and in surrounding areas. At the center of the debate is now the wider political fallout. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has warned that the case is being exploited to fuel division, urging restraint from across the political spectrum. He has directly accused tech billionaire Elon Musk of inflaming tensions online after Musk posted messages calling for people to widely share footage of the incident and criticizing how the case has been reported in mainstream media. Starmer has stressed that Britain must not allow a tragic murder to be turned into a political weapon and has echoed the pleas of Henry Novak's family, who have asked for calm and warned against the case being used to drive hostility. Starmer also met Henry Novak's family at Downing Street on Thursday, praising their dignity and resilience. He said it was vital to learn lessons and deliver justice to honour Henry's memory. Opposition figures, including Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, have raised concerns about policing decisions and have accused authorities of so-called two-tier policing, claims which have been strongly rejected by ministers. Police leadership says the case has understandably sparked intense public emotion, but also warns that officers were acting in fast-moving and chaotic circumstances where misleading information was given at the scene. Meanwhile, the Independent Office for Police Conduct investigation remains ongoing, examining how officers responded in the final moments before Novak's death, with further findings expected in the coming months. The body cam footage released in the case has continued to fuel debate nationwide, raising difficult questions about policing, public trust and political responsibility. Zainab Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now let's take a look at a story from the African continent. Residents in central Kenya are pushing back against plans for a US-linked Ebola quarantine facility near Nanyuki. The dispute has now reached the courts, with judges halting the project while demanding more details from the government. Here's more.
Residents of Nanyuki in central Kenya are opposing plans to establish a US-linked Ebola quarantine facility near their town, raising concerns about public safety and demanding more information from authorities. The proposed center was to be located at the Laikipia Air Force Base and used to quarantine people potentially exposed to Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kenyan President William Ruto has defended the plan as part of the country's emergency preparedness and a strategic health partnership with the United States. However, it has faced growing criticism from local residents concerned about the risks of hosting a facility linked to one of the world's deadliest diseases.
I strongly oppose, because Ebola is a very contagious disease, extremely contagious. So you cannot go and import the disease here and bring it to us and tell us you're going to contain it. Totally unacceptable.
What we are seeing is making us sad. First, there's no community participation, which is the first thing they should have done. You just can't do things by force.
The dispute has now reached the courts. Kenya's High Court has ordered the government to disclose details of the project and suspended plans to establish the facility while a legal challenge is heard. The court has also extended a halt on the wider Kenya-US agreement until a final ruling is made.
All right, after the break, we'll discuss a series of developments that could have significant implications for Armenia's economic and geopolitical trajectory. Stay with us. Welcome back to A-News. Now, Armenia's growing engagement with Western partners received a major boost as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen pledged more than 50 million euros in support for Armenia, while accusing Russia of using economic pressure through restrictions on Armenian exports. Joining us now to discuss this is Ulviya Zulfikar, political analyst, joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Good to have you, ma'am.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to your show.
Now, why is the European Union choosing this moment not only to publicly condemn Russia's trade restrictions on Armenian products as economic coercion, but also to back that criticism with financial support for Armenia?
I think that the European Union wants to send a strong political and economic message at the same time, and by calling Russia's restrictions economic coercion. Brussels is making it clear that it sees trade pressure as a geopolitical tool rather than a normal commercial dispute. But words alone are often not enough. So the European Union is also trying to demonstrate its support through financial assistance. The idea is to help Armenia become more economically resilient and less vulnerable to external pressure. At the same time, this reflects the EU's growing interest in South Caucasus as an important region for connectivity and regional stability. And more broadly, it shows that in today's world, economic support and infrastructure investment are becoming just as important as traditional diplomacy.
Now, for years, Armenia's economic vulnerabilities were often discussed in security terms. Are we now seeing economics being the primary arena of geopolitical competition?
I think we are seeing exactly that. Today, countries compete not only with military power, but also through investments, infrastructure projects, and trade partnerships. Economic influence can create long-term political influence as well. And in the South Caucasus, roads, railways, and energy projects are becoming strategic assets. This doesn't mean security issues disappear, but economics is increasingly becoming another battlefield. And so in many ways, economic competition and geopolitical competition are now closely connected.
Mm-hmm. Now, the EU is offering financial assistance, but can funding realistically compensate for the loss of access to a major export market if Russian restrictions persist?
Financial support can certainly help in the short term, but replacing a major export market is not easy. Russia has been one of Armenia's largest trading partners for many years. We all know that. Money from the EU can support business and reforms, but for now it cannot instantly create new customers. Finding alternative markets takes time, investment, and better infrastructure. So European assistance, I think, can reduce the impact, but it's unlikely for now to fully replace the Russian market in the near future. I think diversification is usually a gradual process.
Mm-hmm. Now, the TRIP project goes beyond aid and focuses on infrastructure. Does that suggest Washington is thinking about Armenia differently than it did even a few years ago?
I think it does. Infrastructure projects usually reflect a long-term strategic vision. Building roads, railways, and digital connections creates partnerships that can last for decades. It suggests that official Washington increasingly sees Armenia not only through a security lens, but also as part of wider regional connectivity. And it all happens after Azerbaijan created a new peace agenda in the region. So this approach fits with broader efforts to strengthen links between Europe and Asia. And in that sense, infrastructure has become a tool of diplomacy as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, the proposed project includes railways, roads, pipelines, and digital networks, as you already mentioned. Which of these could have the greatest long-term geopolitical impact?
I would probably say that transport routes and digital infrastructure, both railways and roads, shape trade flows and determine how goods move across regions. So digital networks are becoming just as important because modern economies depend on data, communications, and technology. So pipelines remain strategically important as well, especially for energy security. But in the long run, countries that become key transit and digital hubs often gain significant geopolitical influence. So connectivity itself is becoming a source of power.
Now, could Armenia eventually find itself in a position where Western investment reduces but does not eliminate its economic dependence on Russia?
I think that is probably the most realistic scenario. Yeah, Armenia's economic ties with Russia have developed over many years and cannot simply disappear overnight. And Western investment can help diversify the economy and reduce certain vulnerabilities. But complete independence from Russia would require a long process of adjustment. Most likely, Armenia will try to maintain relations with multiple partners rather than rely on only one. And I think that kind of balance may offer greater flexibility in the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, finally, Ulvia, when you put these developments together, the EU support, criticism of Russia, and US-backed infrastructure investment, are we now entering a period where infrastructure, trade routes, and economic partnership could become just as important as military and political issues in the region?
I believe we are moving in that direction. Military and political issues will always matter, but infrastructure and trades are becoming equally important strategic tools in our modern world. The countries that control major transport routes or attract large investments gain influence without using force. And the South Caucasus is located at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, so connectivity naturally carries a geopolitical value. So we are likely entering a period where roads, railways, pipelines, and digital networks shape regional politics just as much as traditional security issues. And in many ways, economics is becoming the new language of geopolitics.
Now, that was Ulvia Zulfikar, political analyst, joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me on your show.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.